If you listen to what the Republican candidates say, you'd think our nation was in imminent danger, that it's time to crawl under the desk and put your hands over your head and pray. After all, Iran is out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a president who isn't going to stop them. He isn't going to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon.
If you think a madman is about to have nuclear weapons, and you think that madman is going to use those nuclear weapons, then you have an absolute moral obligation to defend the lives of your people by eliminating the capacity to get nuclear weapons.
We must not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. If they do, the world changes, America will be at risk, and someday nuclear weaponry will be used.
Only Mitt Romney can save us from danger. You hear the same talking points when the subject comes up of cutting the defense budget, which has tripled since 1997 and accounts for more than half of the world's total spending on weapons. We can't cut the Pentagon's budget or else we'll be vulnerable to attack. But the odd thing about these frightful talking points is that they're just talking points and they're not true. The truth is, Americans have never been safer in history than they are today. And the number of violent conflicts around the world is at an all-time low. Really, despite the warnings and so-called threats. How many times has al-Qaeda attacked the United States since 9/11? Zero. So if we're not really in danger, then why are politicians in Washington and members of the media trying to scare and alarm Americans? Joining me now to discuss this is Michael Cohen, a columnist with Foreign Policy and a fellow with the Century Foundation, and author of the book Live from the Campaign Trail. Michael, welcome to the program.
Great, thank you. Good to be here.
Why does the government, why do politicians actually, maybe it's both, consistently exaggerate the level of danger that Americans face?
Well, I think there's two things going on here. You have a political benefit for both parties to sort of play up the notion that there are great dangers out there. If you're Republicans, you've constantly benefited from sort of pointing out global boogeymen, whether it was the communists and now the terrorists, and would have been the Chinese maybe if things go forward, and so you have that kind of advantage for them in sort of promoting this idea that the world is unsafe, because they're sort of they're a national security party. They're seen as the party that is better able to handle foreign policy. On the flip side, Democrats, for fear of being portrayed as weak or feckless on national security, tend to overcompensate, and so they don't want to be portrayed as weak and feckless. So they end up sort of playing into this idea as well that there are all these great dangers out there. So there's a sort of situation where there's a political benefit for both parties to kind of play up this idea that we're at risk, when in reality we're not really at risk.
I've always, and this is a conversation for another time, I imagine, but I've always wondered how the Democrats became the not war party when the Democrats won World War I and the Democrats won World War II. But in any case, are the threats of the perceived threats of Iran or China or any place else in the world real threats to the United States, but specifically those countries to begin with?
No, not really. I mean, sure, these are challenges. I mean, China's economic growth is a challenge to the U.S. Their security position, military position in the Far East is a challenge. It's not a threat. It's not an existential threat. It's not a great power threat. It's not going to, cause any Americans, should cause no Americans to losing sleep at night. Iran getting a nuclear bomb is certainly a challenge to the region as a whole. It's a challenge to key U.S. allies in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. But, it's not really a danger to the U.S. And considering the fact that Iran doesn't really even have a nuclear program at this moment to develop a bomb, it's hard to argue that it's the greatest danger to the world, as some Republicans
Except
to argue.
Day before, or yesterday or the day before, Mitt Romney wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying that Iran was developing a bomb. And then, I believe it was yesterday afternoon or early this morning, the former head of Mossad came out and said, okay, you have, Mr. Romney, just sped up the process that the Iranians are going to do, because now you're telling them if you happen to get elected president, they damn well better have a bomb. Has Mitt Romney's rhetoric changed the dynamic there?
I don't know if it changes the dynamic. I think the Iranians sort of, they operate by whatever they think is in their best interest, but it's not helpful. I mean, I would say that it probably, might in fact spur the process of them doing this. But I still think what the real problem with it is that it creates this false sense in this country that these are terrible threats to the U.S. that and then to take a step further, must be responded to with some use of military force. I mean, I think that's where it ends up, I think, harming our national security debates when we're not able to look at these challenges in a sort of sober and pragmatic light. If we did, we would say this is something we have to deal with. It's not an existential threat to the United States.
How can you say that the United States is right now at a time of less danger and threat than it has been through most of its history, or much of its history, and certainly its recent history? How do you back that up?
Well, I mean, just look at the world around us. I mean, there are fewer conflicts than ever before, certainly in recent memory. There's no great power rival to the U.S. There's no existential threat to the U.S. There's no global power that even has the inkling to threaten the U.S. And the U.S. global hegemony. We also live in a world that has more democracies than ever before, that is more prosperous than ever before. People live longer, they're better educated. All of those attributes, all of, more democratic countries, more economically liberalized countries, tend to be countries that are less inclined to go to war with each other. So we look around the world right now, and in fact, the threats to the U.S. are minimal. Certainly nowhere near as significant as they were during the Cold War when the threats were real, although slightly distant, but certainly they existed. We live in a very safe world. We live in a world where the dangers are not significant to us, and they don't represent real huge threats to us. Yeah. But if you listen to policymakers, that you hear something very, very different.
Or to the media, for that matter, it seems. But Michael, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your observations and for your brilliant writing.